The unforgiving prairie stretched endlessly under the brutal summer sun. Standing motionless in tall grass, the Apache warrior watched with disbelief as the small white girl, no more than 12, crept toward a massive bull bison with nothing but a sharpened stick. Her clothes hung in tatters, her face gaunt from hunger. One swipe of those horns would end her life instantly. His hand rested on his knife. By all tribal law, he should kill her, another settler child from the people who slaughtered his family. Yet something in her desperate courage stirred something long dormant in his heart. The girl lunged wildly, missing the bison. The beast turned, pawing the ground, ready to charge. Would this unlikely encounter between sworn enemies forge a bond that could heal generations of bloodshed? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn broke over the rolling plains, painting the horizon in shades of amber and gold. Takiom knelt by a small stream, his weathered face reflected in the calm water. At 45, the lines etched around his eyes told stories of both joy and sorrow. He cupped water in his hands, drank deeply, then splashed his face, washing away the remnants of fitful sleep. From a leather pouch hanging at his chest, he removed a small carved bear figurine, worn smooth from years of handling. His thumb traced the familiar curves as he whispered a morning prayer to the spirits of his ancestors. This tiny bear, his son's first and only carving, was all that remained of the boy who would never become a man. 10 summers had passed since the massacre. 10 summers since he'd returned from a hunting trip to find his village burning. His wife's body sprawled outside their lodge, his 7-year-old son still clutching a bough in his tiny, lifeless hands. The settlers had shown no mercy. Takiom returned the bear to his medicine pouch. Some among his people thought him strange for living alone in the borderlands between Apache territory and the ever-encroaching white settlements. Neither fully part of his tribe nor entirely removed from them, he existed in the space between worlds. The tribal council respected his skills but questioned his solitary ways. The lone wolf dies, but the pack survives, the elders would say when he made his rare appearances at tribal gatherings. Perhaps they were right, but Takiom had seen enough death to last many lifetimes. He gathered his weapons, a carefully crafted bow, arrows tipped with flint heads he had nabbed himself, and the knife that had belonged to his father and his father's father before him. The blade, originally traded from Mexican settlers generations ago, had taken countless lives. It had saved even more by skinning game and cutting materials for shelter and tools. As he moved through the prairie, his steps were nearly silent, a lifetime of hunting making him almost invisible in the landscape. This particular hunting ground was special, sacred even. It sat at the edge of contested territory, where Apache, Comanche, and white settlers all claimed rights. Most avoided it, fearing conflict. Takiom found peace in this dangerous no-man's land. 3 days earlier, he had discovered the remains of 2 settler wagons. The scene told a grim story. Comanche raiders had attacked suddenly, leaving nothing but splintered wood, scattered belongings, and bodies stripped of anything valuable. Takiom had performed burial rites for the dead in his own way, a blend of Apache tradition and respect for the passage of all souls. He had found no survivors then, but something had drawn him back to this area, some instinct he couldn't explain. The morning air carried the unmistakable scent of bison. A lone bull, separated from its herd, unusual but not unheard of, perhaps injured or old, making it vulnerable. Takiom moved downwind, tracking with practiced ease. As he crested a small rise, he paused. Movement in the tall grass ahead, not the bison. Something smaller, human. Takiom lowered himself to the ground, becoming one with the prairie. Through the swaying grasses he saw her, a white child, a girl with tangled hair the color of summer wheat. Her dress, once blue perhaps, hung in dirty tatters around her thin frame. In her hands, she clutched a makeshift spear, Nothing more than a broken wagon slat, one end crudely sharpened. With a mixture of disbelief and reluctant admiration, Takayom watched as the girl stalked the massive bison. Her technique was terrible. Downwind, making too much noise, her weapon woefully inadequate. Yet her determination was undeniable. Takayom's hand moved to his knife. By the laws of his people, by the memory of his slaughtered family, this child was enemy. One less settler to grow up and take Apache land. One less white face to look upon his people with fear and hatred. Yet he hesitated. The girl's desperate courage reminded him of his son, who had once tried to hunt a deer with only a small knife, eager to prove himself a warrior before his time. The bison sensed something, raising its massive head and snorting. The girl froze, then adjusted her grip on her pathetic weapon. Her hands trembled, but her face showed grim resolve. In that moment, looking at her gaunt features and the jutting bones of her shoulders, Takayom understood. She wasn't hunting for glory or sport. She was starving. This was survival in its purest form. Sarah Harrison had not spoken aloud in 6 days. There was no one left to speak to. Her throat felt like sandpaper as she crouched in the tall grass, eyeing the massive bison. Her hands trembled around the sharpened stick, her father's voice echoing in her mind. "Grip it firm, Sarah. A tool's only as good as the hand that holds it." Pa had taught her many things, but never how to hunt something so enormous. Never how to survive alone on the endless prairie. The tattered Bible tucked inside her dress pressed against her chest, the only possession she'd managed to save. Inside the front cover, the Harrison family history was carefully recorded in her mother's elegant script. James Harrison, born 1823. Elizabeth Harrison, born 1825. Sarah Harrison, born 1840. Thomas Harrison, born 1845. All dead now except her. Their journey west had promised a new beginning. Pa's dream of land and opportunity. "Just think, Sarah girl," he'd said countless times. "A place of our own with good soil and plenty of room to grow." Instead, they'd found death. The attack came at dawn 6 days earlier. Sarah had been gathering kindling when she heard the first screams. Through morning mist, she watched riders swoop into their small wagon train like vengeful spirits. Not Apache, she'd later realize. Her father had shown her pictures of different tribal dress in his guidebook. These were Comanche warriors. She'd hidden in a shallow ravine, paralyzed with terror as the massacre unfolded. The sounds. She would never forget the sounds. Men shouting, women screaming, her little brother Thomas crying for their mother. Then silence, broken only by the crackling of flames as the wagons burned. When the raiders finally departed, Sarah crawled from her hiding place. The carnage was beyond her comprehension. She found her mother's body first, then her father's nearby. He had died trying to protect his wife. Of Thomas, she found only a small shoe, soaked in blood. In her shock, Sarah had wandered aimlessly until nightfall. When darkness came, some instinct for survival stirred within her. She gathered what she could from the smoldering wagons. A knife that was too damaged to be useful, some charred fabric to bind a wound on her arm, and her family Bible miraculously spared from the flames. For days she walked. Sleep came in fitful bursts, always jolting awake at the slightest sound. Thirst drove her to follow a dry creek bed until she found a stagnant pool. Hunger gnawed constantly. Partially satisfied by berries she recognized and grasshoppers caught in desperation. Delirium began to set in on the 4th day. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the vastness of the prairie seemed to swallow her. Sometimes she thought she heard her mother's voice calling, or Thomas laughing as he had when they played tag around the wagons. On the 5th day, she found the massive tracks of the bison herd. An idea formed, a desperate, foolish idea born of starvation and the will to live. Her father had once described how Indians hunted buffalo, though she had only half listened at the time, more interested in her mother's stories of life back east. She fashioned a spear from a broken wagon slat found near an abandoned campsite, using a rock to gradually sharpen one end. The work blistered her hands, but pain was a distant concern compared to hunger. Now, on the 6th day, she had tracked a lone bison separated from its herd. The massive beast grazed peacefully, unaware of the half-starved girl preparing to risk everything on one desperate attack. Sarah's education at the small schoolhouse back in Ohio hadn't prepared her for this. She'd been good at arithmetic and reading, could recite poetry and write a proper letter. Her mother had taught her to sew and cook, preparing her to be a proper frontier wife someday. None of it mattered here. She inched closer, trying to remember what Pa had said about hunting deer when they first set out west. Approach from downwind. Move quietly. Aim for vital areas. The bison was so much bigger than a deer. Its shaggy head swung back and forth as it grazed, massive horns gleaming in the morning sun. One charge would end her life instantly. But without food, she would die anyway. Sarah gripped her makeshift spear tighter, fighting dizziness. The hunger had become a living thing inside her, clawing at her insides. Just a little closer, just a few more steps. She gathered her dwindling strength, raised the spear, and lunged forward. The girl's spear glanced off the bison's thick hide, barely drawing blood. The massive beast bellowed in rage, swinging its head toward the tiny threat. Pawing the ground, it prepared to charge. Takiom was moving before his mind fully registered the decision. Years of hunting had taught his body to act while his thoughts caught up. In one fluid motion, he knocked an arrow, drew his bow to full extension, and released. The arrow struck true, burying itself deep in the bison's eye. The animal staggered, confused by the sudden pain from this new direction. Takiom was already running, drawing his knife as he closed the distance. A second arrow found the soft spot behind the beast's massive shoulder, piercing its heart. The bison took 3 more thundering steps before collapsing heavily to the ground, its final breath escaping in a cloud of dust. The girl stood frozen, her makeshift spear still clutched in white-knuckled hands. When she saw Takiom, her eyes widened with fresh terror. She stumbled backward, raising her pathetic weapon toward this new threat. Taza, Takiom said softly, using the Apache word for peace. He kept his knife visible but lowered, showing he could kill her but was choosing not to. Taza. The girl's eyes darted between him and the fallen bison. She was trembling violently, exhaustion and fear overwhelming her small frame. Her lips moved, but no sound emerged from her parched throat. Takiom slowly sheathed his knife and held up empty hands. "No hurt," he said in broken English learned from traders. "No hurt you." Recognition flickered in her eyes. Understanding, if not trust. She lowered her spear slightly but maintained her distance. With deliberate movements, Takiom approached the bison and knelt beside the massive creature. He placed his hand on its shaggy head and spoke the traditional prayer of thanks in his native tongue, honoring the spirit that had given its life to sustain others. The girl watched this ritual with wary curiosity. When Takiom withdrew his knife to begin the butchering process, she flinched but didn't flee. Takiom cut a strip of liver, the most nutrient-rich part of the animal, and held it out toward her. "Eat," he said. "Good." Hunger warred with suspicion on her face. Finally, hunger won. She approached cautiously, snatched the meat from his hand, and retreated to what she considered a safe distance. The raw liver would normally be unpalatable to a white settler child, but she devoured it with desperate intensity. As she ate, Takiom continued his work, efficiently harvesting the choice parts of the bison. His people wasted nothing of such kills, but he could not take everything alone. He would honor the animal by taking what he and the girl could carry, leaving the rest for the prairie scavengers who played their own role in the natural cycle. From the massive skull, he extracted one horn with careful cuts. This would become a useful tool and a reminder of this strange encounter. The girl watched his every move, her fear gradually giving way to the universal human curiosity about skilled work being done. When she finished eating, color had returned to her pallid cheeks. She wiped her hands on her tattered dress and, for the first time, spoke. "Sarah," she said, pointing to herself. Her voice was rough from disuse and dehydration. Takiom looked up from his butchering. He considered ignoring her. Attachment to this white child would bring nothing but trouble. Yet something compelled him to respond. "Takiom," he said, touching his chest. "Thank you," she whispered, gesturing at the bison. He nodded once, acknowledging her gratitude without warmth. He pointed to a nearby stream barely visible through the grass. "Water," he said. "Drink." As the girl, Sarah, made her way to the stream on unsteady legs, Takiom continued his work while wrestling with an impossible decision. By all logic, he should leave her with some meat and continue on his way. A white child found with an Apache would bring nothing but trouble from both sides. His people would question his judgment. Her people would assume the worst. Yet leaving her alone would mean her death. Despite her surprising resilience, she would not survive long on the prairie. Predators, exposure, or hostile tribes would claim her within days. When Sarah returned from the stream, her face and hair damp from where she had dunked her entire head in the cool water, she looked marginally more human. She stood at a cautious distance, watching him work. "More?" Takiom asked, holding out another piece of meat. She nodded, approaching more readily this time. Dusk approached as Takiom finished preparing the bison meat, cutting it into thin strips that would dry quickly in the sun. Sarah sat nearby, watching his methodical work with increasing interest. She had eaten her fill, more than was wise after near starvation, and now fought against the heaviness of her eyelids. "This way," Takiom said, gathering the meat and his tools. "Camp." Sarah hesitated, clutching her tattered Bible to her chest. Follow an Indian into the gathering darkness? Her father's warnings echoed in her mind. Tales of settlers captured, tortured, killed. Yet this man had saved her life twice now, first from the bison, then from starvation. With no better options, she rose on shaky legs and followed. Takiom's camp was a small, efficient setup in a natural depression that offered protection from wind and prying eyes. A small fire pit, a simple lean-to shelter, and a few carefully arranged possessions showed his skill at living lightly on the land. He rekindled his fire with practiced ease, then arranged the meat strips on a frame of green branches to smoke slowly through the night. Sarah hovered at the edge of the firelight, unsure of her place in this alien setting. Takiom gestured to a spot near the fire. "Sit. Rest." She obeyed, grateful for the warmth. The night chill was already settling into her bones, her thin dress offering little protection. Takiom noticed her shivering and, after a moment's hesitation, retrieved a small deerskin from his shelter and offered it to her. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, wrapping it around her shoulders. The softness surprised her, nothing like the rough wool blankets from home. They sat in silence as the stars emerged above. Sarah tried to stay alert, to watch the stranger who had inexplicably helped her, but exhaustion soon overwhelmed her vigilance. She jerked awake repeatedly, each time finding Takiom in the same position, calmly tending the fire or working on a small wooden object in his hands. "Sleep," he said eventually, pointing to a spot inside his lean-to. "Safe." Sarah shook her head, fear returning. "I'll stay here." Takiom shrugged, unbothered by her distrust. He reached into a pouch and withdrew a small wooden whistle, simply carved but beautiful in its functionality. He blew it softly, producing a sound like a night bird's call. "If lost," he said, offering it to her. "Blow. I hear." Sarah accepted the whistle cautiously, turning it over in her hands. It was smooth, worn from years of use, with symbols carved along its length that she couldn't understand. "What do these mean?" she asked, pointing to the markings. Prayer, Takayom answered. For protection. It was the longest conversation they had managed. Sarah placed the whistle carefully beside her, within easy reach. The gesture wasn't lost on Takayom. She still didn't trust him enough to wear it around her neck. As the night deepened, Sarah finally succumbed to sleep, curled beside the fire with the deerskin pulled tight around her. Takayom remained awake, watching this strange child who had stumbled into his solitary life. Her face in sleep looked younger, the hardness of survival temporarily smoothed away. Shortly before dawn, Sarah began to thrash in her sleep, crying out for her mother and father. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool night air. Takayom recognized the signs of fever, likely brought on by exposure, exhaustion, and the sudden introduction of rich food to her starved body. He moved quietly to her side, placing a hand on her forehead. The heat confirmed his suspicions. With a soft sigh, he gathered his medicine pouch and set to work. He had not treated a white person before, but illness crossed the boundaries between their peoples. Sarah's eyes fluttered open, glassy with fever. Pa, she murmured. Rest, Takayom replied, mixing herbs with water in a small clay cup. Drink this. She tried to push the cup away, but lacked the strength. Tastes bad, she complained after Takayom managed to get some of the bitter liquid between her lips. Makes better, he assured her, his normally stern expression softening slightly. Throughout the remainder of the night, Takayom kept watch over the feverish child, applying cool cloths to her forehead and ensuring she drank his medicine when she was lucid enough to swallow. In her delirium, Sarah spoke frequently, of her family, of the attack, of her days alone. The fragments painted a picture that stirred unwelcome echoes of Takayom's own loss. As dawn broke, her fever finally began to subside. Takayom moved away to tend the morning fire, contemplating the decision that could no longer be postponed. The girl would live, but what would become of her now? Morning sunlight filtered through the prairie grass as Takayom knelt at the edge of camp, drawing in the dirt with a stick. Sarah, still weak but fever-broken, watched him create a crude map of their surroundings. We here, he said, marking an X. His finger traced eastward. White soldiers here. Another mark. Many days' walk. He pointed west. My people here. The third mark. Many days also. Sarah studied the map, her young mind grasping what Takayom was trying to explain. They were caught between worlds, too far from either civilization for a quick journey. There are forts, she offered, her voice stronger than the previous day. Pa said we'd find army forts along the trail. Takayom nodded gravely. Soldiers look for Indians, not little girl. He erased the map with a sweep of his hand. Winter coming soon. Not good time for long journey. The implication hung in the air between them. Sarah clutched her Bible tighter, the reality of her situation sinking in. She was alive, but utterly dependent on this man from a people she had been taught to fear. What will happen to me? She finally asked, the question that had lingered unspoken. Takayom rose, considering his response carefully. He had spent the night weighing impossible choices. Taking her to his tribe would invite suspicion and resentment. Traveling to a white settlement risked his own life. A lone Apache with a white child would be shot before any explanations could be offered. Leaving her with supplies and directions would almost certainly lead to her death. I teach you, he said at last, to survive. When stronger, find your people. Relief and apprehension crossed Sarah's face in equal measure. You'll teach me to hunt? Like you. A hint of amusement flickered in Takayom's eyes. First learn to not die, then learn to hunt. It was a sensible plan, a temporary solution that acknowledged the reality of their situation. Sarah would learn basic survival skills, regain her strength, and eventually be guided toward her own kind. It would delay Takayom's return to solitude, but not permanently. We start now, he declared, handing her a small sack of dried meat. "Carry this." For the next several hours, Takayom led Sarah through a painstaking lesson in finding water. Rather than simply showing her the nearest stream, he taught her to read the landscape, how certain plants indicated water below the surface, how animal trails often led to drinking spots, how morning dew could be collected from leaves in an emergency. Sarah proved a quick study, her natural intelligence overcoming the cultural and language barriers between them. By midday, she had successfully identified 3 potential water sources without assistance. "Good," Takayom acknowledged, offering a rare nod of approval. "Now food." He showed her which berries were safe, which mushrooms to avoid, how to find edible roots that grew beneath certain plants. Sarah listened intently, occasionally jotting symbols in the dirt to help her remember. As they worked, Takayom caught movement on the distant horizon, riders moving fast. He stiffened, scanning the plains with narrowed eyes. "What is it?" Sarah asked, sensing his change in demeanor. "Comanche scouts," he replied quietly. "We go. Now." They quickly gathered their few possessions. Takayom doused the remains of their fire with dirt, carefully obscuring any evidence of their presence. "They're the ones who attacked our wagons," Sarah whispered, fear returning to her voice. Takayom nodded grimly. "They see white girl with Apache." He drew a finger across his throat, the meaning unmistakable. As they prepared to leave, Sarah suddenly dashed back to the campsite, retrieving something from beside the fire pit, a large horn from the bison, which Takayom had begun fashioning into a cup. "Can I bring this?" she asked, rejoining him with the trophy clutched to her chest. "To remember." Takayom studied her for a moment, then nodded once. The bison horn was bulky but light, and clearly held meaning for her, her first successful hunt, even if he had made the killing blow. They set off at a brisk pace, heading toward rougher terrain where they could more easily evade pursuit. Sarah struggled to keep up, her recent illness and the unfamiliar territory challenging her endurance. Without comment, Takayom slowed his pace just enough to allow her to follow. As dusk approached, Takayom made a decision. His hidden valley, the place he had created for himself after leaving his tribe, was 3 days' journey away. It was his sanctuary, a place no outsider had ever seen. Taking the girl there went against every instinct for self-preservation he had developed over the past decade. Yet it was the only place he was certain they would be safe. The journey to Takayom's hidden valley demanded more from Sarah than she thought possible. They traveled at dawn and dusk, resting during the hottest part of the day and moving carefully at night. Takayom set a pace that challenged Sarah's endurance, but he never left her behind, pausing often to allow her to catch up. On the second day, they encountered their first major obstacle, a swift river swollen from recent mountain rains. Takayom studied the rushing water, then scanned the banks for a suitable crossing. "Too deep for walking," he said. "Must swim." Sarah paled. "I can't swim." Takayom frowned. How could anyone reach her age without learning to swim? Among his people, children splashed in streams almost before they could walk. "I carry you," he decided, kneeling down. "On back. Hold tight." Sarah hesitated, then climbed onto his back, wrapping her arms around his neck. She kept the precious bison horn tucked inside her dress, unwilling to lose this trophy. The river's current was stronger than Takayom had anticipated. Halfway across, a surge nearly swept them downstream. Sarah clung desperately to him, her eyes squeezed shut, small body trembling. Takayom's powerful strokes fought the current until they finally reached the opposite bank, both of them soaked and gasping. "Not so bad," Takayom said as they collapsed on the shore, his attempt at humor surprising even himself. Sarah's laugh, her first since he'd found her, burst out unexpectedly. "Not so bad? We nearly drowned." Takayom's expression softened momentarily. "Apache not drown in little water." "It didn't look so little to me," Sarah countered, wringing water from her dress. Their shared experience crossing the river marked a subtle shift in their relationship. The life-or-death moment had required absolute trust, Sarah putting her life in Takiyomi's hands, and Takiyomi accepting responsibility for her safety. As they continued their journey, Takiyomi began pointing out features of the landscape, teaching Sarah the Apache names for plants and animals they encountered. Sarah, in turn, shared the English words, her natural curiosity overcoming her lingering caution. "See," Takiyomi said, pointing to a stone. "Stone," Sarah replied. "See," he repeated, waiting for her to try the word. "Say," she attempted, mangling the pronunciation. Takiyomi's mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Close. See." This exchange became their pattern, a primitive language lesson that helped pass the long hours of walking. By the third day, Sarah had accumulated a small vocabulary of Apache words, though her pronunciation remained a source of hidden amusement for Takiyomi. During a rest period, Takiyomi spotted a golden eagle soaring high above them. He pointed it out to Sarah, explaining in his limited English its significance to his people. "Eagle sees far," he said. "Brings messages from spirits." Sarah watched the majestic bird with wonder. "It's beautiful." When the eagle dropped a feather that drifted down near their resting spot, Takiyomi retrieved it with reverence. After a moment's contemplation, he offered it to Sarah. "For courage," he said. "Eagle strong. You small but strong too." Sarah accepted the feather with appropriate solemnity, understanding it was no small gift. She carefully tucked it alongside her Bible. "Thank you," she said, then attempted the Apache phrase he had taught her earlier. Takiyomi nodded in approval. Late on the third day, they crested a ridge overlooking a vast prairie. In the distance, Sarah spotted dust rising, riders moving in formation. "Are those your people?" she asked. Takiyomi squinted, then shook his head. "Blue coats. Soldiers." They retreated quickly from the ridgeline. Though the soldiers might represent safety for Sarah, Takiyomi knew they would shoot an Apache on sight, especially one traveling with a white child. Explanations would come too late, if at all. That night, they camped in a well-concealed hollow, eating cold provisions to avoid the telltale smoke of a fire. Sarah sensed Takiyomi's increased vigilance and kept her voice to a whisper. "Are we close to your hidden place?" "Tomorrow," he replied. "One more hard walk." As darkness fell completely, Takiyomi produced the small wooden whistle he had given Sarah days earlier. He demonstrated several different calls, one that mimicked an owl, another like a coyote, a third resembling the wind through grass. "Different sounds, different meanings," he explained. "Danger. Food found. Come here." Sarah practiced each call until she could reproduce them convincingly. The simple lesson in Apache communication represented another threshold crossed. Takiyomi was sharing knowledge that could be used against his people, trusting this child with secrets few outsiders ever learned. Dawn broke with a light mist shrouding the landscape. Takiyomi woke Sarah with gentle urgency. "Today we reach safe place," he said. "But first, hardest climb." Ahead loomed a rugged escarpment, a natural wall of stone that appeared impassable to Sarah's untrained eye. The stone wall before them seemed impossible to scale, especially for Sarah's small frame and limited experience. Yet Takiyomi moved with confidence, guiding her to what appeared to be a solid rock face covered with scrub brush. "Watch carefully," he instructed, pushing aside the dense vegetation to reveal a narrow crevice, just wide enough for a person to slip through sideways. "Secret path." Sarah followed him into the shadowy passage, the rough stone walls pressing close on either side. The path twisted upward, sometimes so narrow they had to squeeze through, other times opening into small chambers where they could catch their breath. Sunlight filtered through occasional cracks overhead, providing just enough light to navigate by. "How did you find this?" Sarah whispered, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "Followed wounded deer," Takiyomi replied. "Many seasons ago." After nearly an hour of climbing through the hidden passage, they emerged onto a narrow ledge high on the escarpment. Sarah gasped at the view, rolling prairie stretching endlessly behind them, while ahead, "It's beautiful," she breathed. Below them lay a hidden valley, perhaps 2 miles long and half as wide, sheltered on all sides by steep rock walls. A small stream wound through its center, feeding a clear pool before continuing on. Stands of cottonwood and willow trees provided shade, while parts of the valley floor were covered in lush grass. It was an oasis of green amid the arid landscape. "My place," Takayom said simply. "No one knows." He led her down a series of switchback trails to the valley floor. As they approached the center of the sanctuary, Sarah could see evidence of Takayom's long residence. A well-constructed lodge built in the Apache style but with some adaptations, a carefully tended garden plot with corn and beans growing in neat rows, drying racks for meat and hides, and even a small corral that currently stood empty. "You live here alone?" Sarah asked, taking in the well-organized camp. Takayom nodded. 10 summers now. He showed her inside the lodge, a surprisingly comfortable dwelling with a central fire pit, sleeping platforms covered with soft furs, and various tools and supplies organized around the perimeter. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams, filling the space with earthy, pleasant scents. "For tonight, you sleep here," he said, indicating one of the platforms. "Tomorrow, build your own shelter if you stay long." Sarah ran her hand over the smooth wooden frame of the sleeping platform, marveling at the craftsmanship. "You made all this yourself?" "With these hands," Takayom confirmed, holding up his calloused palms. "Apache learned to make what is needed." He left her to explore the lodge while he retrieved water from the stream. Sarah moved about the space, examining the various items with curiosity but careful not to disturb anything. On a small shelf-like structure, she noticed several carved figures, animals mostly, but also one of a woman and a small boy. She didn't touch these, sensing they were personal and perhaps sacred. When Takayom returned, he carried not only water but also clay gathered from the streambed. He set it before Sarah along with some simple tools. "Today's lesson," he announced. "Make water vessel." He demonstrated, taking a portion of the clay and skillfully shaping it into a small bowl. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, the clay responding to his touch as if alive. Sarah's first attempt collapsed immediately. Her second formed a lopsided shape that cracked as it dried. By her third try, frustration showed clearly on her face. "Why can't I do it right?" she demanded. "First time always bad," Takayom said matter-of-factly. "Hands must learn." He guided her through another attempt, his larger hands occasionally correcting her technique. This time, she produced a crude but functional small cup. "Good," he nodded. "Tomorrow better." As evening approached, Takayom taught Sarah how to build and tend a proper fire in the stone-ringed pit outside the lodge. He showed her how to cook a simple meal of beans and dried meat, supplemented with wild onions he had gathered. They ate in companionable silence as darkness fell over the valley. Stars appeared in the clear sky above, more brilliant than Sarah had ever seen them. "Will they look for me?" she asked suddenly. "My people, I mean." Takayom considered her question carefully. "Maybe, but prairie big. Many dangers. Most think you dead." The harsh truth hung between them. To the world outside this valley, Sarah Harrison had likely joined the ranks of countless pioneer children claimed by the unforgiving frontier. "Then who am I now?" she wondered aloud, more to herself than to Takayom. He studied her thoughtfully across the fire. Same girl, different path. Weeks passed in the hidden valley, marked by the rhythm of daily tasks and increasingly complex lessons. As promised, Takayom helped Sarah construct her own small shelter near his lodge. A simple lean-to at first, which gradually evolved into a more substantial structure as her skills improved. The process of building became a lesson in itself, with Takayom demonstrating how to select and prepare materials, how to bind them together without nails, how to position the dwelling to catch morning sun while providing afternoon shade. Each day brought new knowledge. Takayom proved a demanding teacher, expecting Sarah to master basic skills before moving to more advanced ones. He showed little patience for carelessness but acknowledged genuine effort, even when results fell short. Again, became his most common instruction, sometimes spoken with stern disapproval, other times with the barest hint of encouragement. Fire-making came first, the most essential survival skill. Sarah's fingers blistered as she learned to create sparks with flint, to nurture the tiny ember with her breath, to build a fire that would serve rather than destroy. After days of practice, she could reliably start a cooking fire without assistance, a small victory that brought her immeasurable pride. Now you not freeze when winter comes? Takayom nodded, the closest he came to praise. Water collection, food preparation, and plant identification followed. Sarah learned which roots could be ground for flour, which berries would poison rather than nourish, which plants held medicine in their leaves or bark. She absorbed the knowledge eagerly, her quick mind making connections that sometimes surprised even Takayom. The hunting lessons proved more challenging. Sarah's first attempts with the small bow Takayom crafted for her yielded nothing but lost arrows and frustration. "You think too much," he told her after another miss. "Feel the bow as part of arm. See where arrow wants to go." "That doesn't make any sense," Sarah protested. "An arrow doesn't want anything." Takayom's expression remained impassive. When hunter and bow become one, arrow finds its path. Sarah rolled her eyes, a gesture Takayom had come to recognize as youthful defiance, but continued practicing. Gradually, her aim improved. The day she brought down her first rabbit was a milestone, though what followed tested her resolve. "Now you clean," Takayom instructed, handing her his knife. Sarah stared at the dead animal, its soft fur still warm. "I can't," she whispered. "Then you not eat," he replied simply. "Hunter who cannot face death brings dishonor to animal sacrifice." Sarah swallowed hard, tears welling in her eyes. "Show me how." With careful instruction, Takayom guided her through the process of skinning and cleaning the rabbit. Sarah's hands trembled, and she had to stop twice to compose herself, but she completed the task. That night, she ate the meat she had harvested, understanding for the first time the full circle of what it meant to provide for oneself. "All parts of purpose," Takayom explained as they worked with the rabbit skin the next day, showing her how to scrape and stretch it. Fur for warmth, bones for tools, sinew for binding. Nothing wasted. These practical lessons filled their days, but evenings brought a different kind of education. As they sat by the fire, Takayom began sharing Apache stories, tales of the creation of trickster coyote, of the stars and their meanings. His English remained limited, but with gestures, drawings in the dirt, and their growing shared vocabulary, the stories took shape in Sarah's imagination. In return, Sarah recited what she remembered from her schoolbooks: poems, Bible verses, historical events as she had been taught them. One evening, she sang a hymn her mother had loved, her clear voice echoing softly in the valley. Takayom listened without comment, but his expression grew distant, perhaps remembering songs from his own past. Gradually, they established a routine of language exchange. He would teach her an Apache word or phrase, and she would provide the English equivalent. Both struggled with the unfamiliar sounds of the other's tongue, occasionally resulting in unintentional humor. "No, no," Sarah laughed one evening after a particularly mangled attempt by Takayom to pronounce Massachusetts. "Massachusetts. Why white people make words so long?" he grumbled, though the corner of his mouth twitched slightly. As moons waxed and waned, Sarah's body grew stronger. The gaunt, half-starved child gradually disappeared, replaced by a lean, sun-browned girl with calloused hands and watchful eyes. Her tattered dress had long since been replaced by clothing Takayom helped her fashion from deerskin, practical garments that offered protection from sun and brush. One morning, Takiom presented her with a new bow, larger than her training one, decorated with intricate carvings. "You ready now?" he said. "Today we hunt deer." Autumn painted the hidden valley in russet and gold. The stream ran lower than in summer months, but still provided clear, sweet water. Sarah and Takiom had established a comfortable routine, their days filled with work and learning, their communication growing more fluid despite the language barrier. On this crisp morning, they ventured beyond the valley's protective walls, a rare excursion, but necessary to hunt larger game before winter set in. Deer had become scarce within their sanctuary, forced by the season to seek food elsewhere. "Remember," Takiom instructed as they moved silently through the tall grass, wind in face, feet quiet, eyes always moving. Sarah nodded, every sense alert. 3 months ago, she had been a frightened, helpless child. Now she moved with growing confidence, reading the landscape as Takiom had taught her. She could identify tracks, estimate how recently they were made, predict where an animal might be heading. By midday, they had spotted several promising signs: fresh deer droppings, browsed vegetation, a clear trail leading toward a distant water source. Takiom indicated they should separate slightly, Sarah circling to the east while he approached from the west, increasing their chances of flushing the deer toward one another. Sarah moved carefully through a small copse of trees, bow ready. A snapping twig, too heavy for a deer, made her freeze. Instinctively, she melted into the shadows beneath a fallen log, making herself invisible as Takiom had taught her. Through the underbrush, she spotted not deer but men. White men in blue uniforms, cavalry soldiers leading their horses through the difficult terrain. Their voices carried clearly in the still air. "Captain said to scout this whole area," one soldier complained. "Waste of time if you ask me. No Apache would hide this close to the new fort." "Orders are orders," his companion replied. "Besides, there's that report about the missing settler girl. Command thinks she might still be alive somewhere." Sarah's heart pounded. They were looking for her? After all this time? "Yeah, well, if the Indians got her, she ain't alive now," the first soldier said grimly. "Probably better that way, considering what they do to captives." The men continued past, unaware of Sarah's presence. When they were safely gone, she used the bird call Takiom had taught her, 3 short notes, a pause, then 2 more. "Danger nearby." Takiom appeared silently beside her moments later, his expression grave as she whispered what she had heard. "Blue coats building fort?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "You sure?" Sarah nodded. "That's what they said. A new fort, nearby." Takiom's face hardened. "Show me where they went." They abandoned the deer hunt, instead tracking the soldiers at a safe distance. Eventually, the men rejoined a larger patrol, all mounted on horseback. Sarah and Takiom observed from a concealed position as the patrol rode toward the northeast. "We follow," Takiom decided. "Must know how close." They traveled cautiously for several hours, stopping when the distant sound of construction reached them. Hammering, shouting, the crack of axes felling trees. From a protected vantage point on a rocky hillside, they observed the nascent fort taking shape in a valley below. "Too close," Takiom murmured, genuine concern in his voice. "They will find valley eventually." As they watched, Sarah spotted something glinting in the dirt near their position. Carefully retrieving it, she held up a brass button bearing the insignia of the U.S. Cavalry, evidence that soldiers had already scouted this hillside. "Our safe place not safe much longer," Takiom said, taking the button and studying it. "Military everywhere now." They made their way back toward the hidden valley, both lost in thought. The sanctuary that had become home now seemed fragile, its discovery inevitable as the military expanded its presence. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Sarah finally asked the question that had been forming since hearing the soldiers' conversation. "What happens if they find me?" she said quietly. "Would I have to go with them?" Takiom poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. "They your people," he replied carefully. "Maybe better life with them." "They're not my people anymore," Sarah said with unexpected fierceness. "My family is dead. I belong here now." Takiom studied her across the flames, his expression unreadable. "White girl raised by Apache. Not accepted by either." "Then we stay hidden," Sarah insisted. "We've been safe here for months." "Soldiers have many eyes, many horses," Takiom countered. "Valley good hiding place, but not forever." They lapsed into silence, the weight of the outside world suddenly pressing in on their isolated existence. Sarah twisted a piece of grass between her fingers, anxiety evident in every movement. "There's something else," she finally said. "The soldiers mentioned my name. They're still looking for me." Takiom nodded slowly. "You must decide. Stay or go." "I don't want to leave," Sarah whispered. "But I don't want to put you in danger either." "Tomorrow," Takiom said, rising to his feet, "we scout more. Learn what soldiers plan. Then decide." Dawn found Takiom and Sarah preparing for another scouting expedition. As Takiom checked his weapons, Sarah noticed him handling an ornately carved stick she had never seen before. About 2 feet long with intricate symbols etched along its length and eagle feathers attached to one end. "What is that?" she asked, curiosity overcoming her concern about the soldiers. Takiom hesitated, then held out the stick for her inspection. "Talking stick. For tribal council." Sarah examined the beautiful object, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "Why do you have a council stick? I thought you lived alone even before the valley." Takiom reclaimed the stick, his expression distant. "Not always alone. Once, I was Kijayindi, how you say, one who speaks for others. A leader." Sarah's eyes widened. "You were a chief?" "Not chief. Advisor to chief. Voice of wisdom in council." He tucked the talking stick into his belt. "Long ago, before sorrow came." Sensing an opening into Takiom's closely guarded past, Sarah pressed gently. "What happened?" Takiom gazed toward the valley entrance, as if looking beyond to a different time. "I told you of raid, wife, son killed by white settlers." Sarah nodded. He had mentioned this once, briefly. "Not tell all truth," he continued. "After death, I wanted vengeance. Led warriors against white settlements. Many died, men, women, children." His voice remained steady, but pain shadowed his eyes. "Their screams same as my wife's screams. Their blood same color as my son's blood." He touched the talking stick at his belt. "Council wanted more war. I saw only endless killing. Spoke against revenge. Called coward by young warriors. So I left. Came here to find different path." Sarah absorbed this revelation in silence. She had grown to trust Takiom, to see him as protector and teacher. Now she confronted the reality that he had once done to others what the Comanche had done to her family. "Do you regret it?" she finally asked. "The raids. Every day," he answered simply. "Cannot wash blood from hands. Can only try to walk better path now." Their eyes met in shared understanding. Both had been transformed by violence. Both were seeking redemption in their own ways. They set out shortly after, taking a different route than the previous day to avoid potential patrols. As they crossed a rocky ravine several miles from the valley, Takiom suddenly raised his hand in warning. Sarah instantly froze, following his gaze to a faint trail of smoke rising from behind a cluster of boulders. Motioning for her to stay back, Takiom approached the smoke source with arrow nocked and ready. Sarah watched as he suddenly lowered his weapon and called out in Apache. An answering voice, weak but clear, responded. Takiom beckoned her forward. Behind the boulders lay a young Apache warrior, perhaps 20 years old. His leg badly wounded and bound with a crude bandage. The man's eyes widened at the sight of Sarah, his hand instinctively reaching for a knife at his belt. "No," Takayom commanded sharply in Apache. She is under my protection. Sarah understood enough of their language now to grasp the essence of the conversation that followed. The wounded man was called Naten, a scout from Takayom's former band. He had been tracking cavalry movements when he was spotted and shot. Though he had escaped, the bullet remained in his thigh, and infection had set in. "We must help him," Sarah said, already examining the wound with the knowledge Takayom had taught her about treating injuries. Takayom nodded, though concern lined his face. "Dangerous. If he dies, his spirit tells others where we hide." "He'll die for certain if we leave him," Sarah countered. Together, they constructed a travois to transport Naten back to the valley. The injured scout watched Sarah with open suspicion as she helped prepare medicinal herbs to fight the infection. "Why does Thunderwalker shelter a white child?" he asked Takayom in Apache, using what Sarah recognized as Takayom's tribal name. "The ways of the spirits are mysterious," Takayom replied. "She survived when she should have died. I found her when I should have killed her. Now she learns our ways." Naten scoffed weakly. "The council has asked for your return many times. They will not accept this arrangement." "The council no longer guides my path," Takayom said firmly. As Sarah worked to clean Naten's wound, the scout studied her with increasing curiosity. "She uses Apache medicine," he observed. "She learns quickly," Takayom acknowledged. "Now be still. The bullet must be removed." That night, with Naten sleeping fitfully after the painful extraction of the bullet, Takayom shared the scout's news. The U.S. Army was systematically pushing all Apache bands toward designated reservation lands. Those who resisted were being hunted down. Many had already been captured or killed. "My people need guidance," Takayom said heavily. "Naten says council requests my return, to advise on whether to fight or surrender." "Will you go?" Sarah asked, her voice small. Takayom gazed into the fire. "What of you? Cannot take white child to Apache camp." "Why not? You said yourself I'm learning your ways. Different when only us. Among my people." He shook his head. "Many lost family to whites. Many seek vengeance still." "Like you once did," Sarah said quietly. Takayom nodded, the weight of the decision evident in his silence. 3 days passed as they nursed Naten back to strength. The young scout's fever broke, and with it, his open hostility toward Sarah gradually diminished. He watched with evident curiosity as she applied medicine to his wound, speaking to him in halting Apache, moving about the camp with the practiced ease of someone familiar with their ways. On the 4th morning, Takayom announced his decision. "We return to my people," he said as they shared a simple breakfast. "Naten will guide us. You will come also." Sarah's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "You're sure?" "No," Takayom admitted. "But leaving you alone is greater danger." They spent the day preparing for the journey. Takayom showed Sarah how to apply the ceremonial paints that would mark her as under his protection. Ochre streaks across her cheekbones, a handprint in white clay on her shoulder, symbols whose meaning she didn't fully understand painted on her forehead. "These tell my people you are Indaizi, taken in spirit," Takayom explained. "Not captive, not enemy, under protection of Thunderwalker." "Will they believe it?" Sarah asked, holding still as he painted the last symbol. "Some will," he replied honestly. "Others will test." They departed at dawn, Naten still limping but able to travel. Takayom had decided to leave the hidden valley intact, a sanctuary to return to if needed. Sarah took one last look at the place that had become home, committing its peaceful beauty to memory. The journey to the Apache encampment took 5 days, made longer by Naten's injury and the need to avoid cavalry patrols. As they traveled, Takayom intensified Sarah's education, drilling her on proper behavior in the Apache camp. "Women sit how?" he would ask suddenly. "Legs folded to side, never straight out," Sarah would answer. "When elder speaks?" Eyes down, no interrupting. If offered food, accept with both hands. Eat all that is given. The lessons continued relentlessly. How to enter a lodge, whom to address directly, what gestures to avoid. Sarah absorbed it all, understanding that her survival might depend on proper observance of Apache customs. On the final day, as they approached the outskirts of the Apache territory, Takiom presented her with a small deerskin pouch. For courage, he said. Inside was a mixture of red ochre, the same sacred paint he had used for her protective markings. If afraid, touch this. Remember, you are thunder walkers, Indazi. The Apache encampment appeared suddenly. Dozens of wickiups and hide lodges arranged in a traditional circle, smoke rising from cooking fires. Horses grazed in a nearby meadow, while children played and women worked outside the dwellings. At the perimeter, warriors stood guard, instantly alert at the approach of strangers. Naten called out in Apache, identifying himself. The guard's posture relaxed slightly until they recognized Takiom, and then saw Sarah. Weapons were raised again, voices shouting in alarm. Takiom stepped forward, his hand raised in the universal sign of peace. I am Thunderwalker, he announced in a commanding voice Sarah had never heard him use before. I return to speak with the council. The commotion drew others from the camp. Women gathered at a safe distance, pointing and murmuring. Children were hurried inside lodges. A group of older men emerged, moving with the dignity of authority. One man stepped forward, tall, with gray streaks in his long hair and a face deeply lined by sun and experience. A magnificent eagle feather headdress identified him as the chief. Thunder Walker, he said, his voice neither welcoming nor hostile. Many seasons have passed since you walked among us. Why do you return now, and with this? He glanced at Sarah. Strange companion? Nantan, Takiom acknowledged the chief with respect. I come because our people face great danger. The blue-coat soldiers build forts on our hunting grounds. They force other bands onto the barren lands. I would speak with the council on these matters. Nantan's gaze remained fixed on Sarah. And the white child? Is she captive? Trophy? What madness brings you to our camp with the daughter of our enemies? Takiom placed his hand on Sarah's shoulder, where the white handprint marked his protection. She is Indaizi, one who died but returned in different form. The spirits guided our paths to cross. She has learned our ways and walks between worlds. She can help us understand the white man's thinking. Whispers spread through the gathering crowd. Some made protective signs against evil spirits. Others simply stared in disbelief. Nantan studied Sarah for a long moment, then turned to an elderly woman nearby. Lilyui, what do your dreams say of this? The old woman, clearly a respected medicine person, approached Sarah without fear. Her gnarled fingers touched the painted symbols on Sarah's forehead, then lifted the girl's chin to look directly into her eyes. Unusual spirit, Lilyui pronounced. Not evil, not good, just different. The paint speaks truth. Thunderwalker's protection is real. A tense silence followed. Finally, Nantan nodded once. The council will hear Thunderwalker tonight. Until then, you may set your lodge at the eastern edge of camp. The child stays with you at all times. As they moved through the camp toward their designated place, Sarah felt dozens of eyes following their every step. Children peeked from behind their mothers. Warriors watched with open suspicion, and everywhere people whispered the name Thunderwalker, with tones ranging from reverence to scorn. They fear me, Sarah whispered. They fear what they do not understand, Takiom corrected. Show strength now. Tomorrow will be harder. Dawn revealed the Apache camp in full. Activity, women preparing morning meals, men gathering for hunting parties, children performing their assigned chores. Sarah woke in Takiom's temporary lodge, momentarily disoriented by the sounds of community after months of isolation in the valley. Stay close today, Takayom advised as they shared a simple breakfast. Some accept you because of my protection. Others. He left the warning unfinished. Sarah nodded, touching the pouch of red ochre hanging at her neck. The previous night's council meeting had been tense, with Takayom reporting what they had learned about military movements. The tribal leaders had listened in grim silence, but made no decisions. Today, discussions would continue. What should I do while you're with the council? Sarah asked. Observe, listen, learn. Takayom handed her a water skin. Help women at stream if they allow. Show willing hands. Sarah ventured cautiously into the camp, feeling the weight of curious and hostile stares. Children ducked behind lodges at her approach, while women turned their backs or watched warily. She made her way toward the stream where several women were washing hides and clothes. For nearly an hour, they ignored her presence. Sarah sat quietly nearby, watching their efficient movements. Finally, an elderly woman dropped a heavy water jug, which cracked upon impact with a stone. Without hesitation, Sarah retrieved her own water skin and offered it to the woman. "Two," she said, using the Apache word for water. The old woman's weathered face registered surprise, then cautious acceptance. She took the offered water skin with a nod of thanks. The gesture opened a narrow path of communication. By midday, Sarah was helping the women scrape hides, her willing hands and basic knowledge of their techniques gradually earning reluctant tolerance, if not acceptance. Not everyone welcomed her presence. A young warrior named Kichi openly expressed his disgust at having a white child in their midst. "Thunder Walker has lost his mind, bringing enemy blood among us," he declared loudly whenever Sarah was within earshot. "The white devils kill our people, steal our land, and now we welcome their spawn?" The days fell into a pattern. While Takayom spent long hours in council, Sarah worked alongside the women, improving her Apache vocabulary and demonstrating her willingness to contribute. Children gradually overcame their fear, first watching her from a distance, then approaching with cautious curiosity. By the fifth day, several young ones would sit near her as she worked, occasionally asking questions about the world beyond their territory. On the seventh day, Takayom approached Sarah with purpose in his stride. "We go hunting," he announced. "Council needs to know more about soldier movements." They set out with two other warriors, traveling northward toward the area where they had spotted the military fort. Sarah's tracking skills, honed during her months with Takayom, impressed the other Apache men, though they were careful not to show it openly. As they crested a ridge overlooking the fort, they were startled by the scale of development. What had been a basic outpost weeks earlier now resembled a permanent installation, with substantial buildings, corrals for horses, and a wooden palisade surrounding the perimeter. Dozens of blue-coated soldiers moved about, drilling in formation or tending to various tasks. "Many more than before," Takayom observed grimly. "They prepare for something big." They circled the fort at a safe distance, observing supply wagons arriving from the east. Among the military personnel, Sarah spotted several civilians, a man and woman dressed in plain but respectable clothing, seemingly out of place amid the martial atmosphere. "Missionaries," she whispered to Takayom. "People who teach about the Christian God." Takayom studied the couple with interest. "They fight with soldiers?" "No, they usually come to convert Indians, to teach them white ways and religion. Like I teach you Apache ways," Takayom noted with irony. As they watched, the woman missionary emerged from a building, pinning something to her collar. A small silver locket that caught the sunlight. Sarah gasped softly. "What is it?" Takayom asked. "That locket. It looks just like the one my mother wore. It had tiny flowers engraved on the front." The coincidence was striking, but they had no time to ponder it. A patrol emerged from the fort gates, forcing them to retreat into the cover of nearby woods. As they made their way back toward the Apache camp, they encountered fresh signs of conflict. a site where soldiers had clashed with what appeared to be a small group of Apache warriors. Blood stained the grass, and discarded equipment told the story of a brief but violent encounter. "The war begins already," one of their companions said grimly. That evening, Takiom reported their findings to the tribal council. The increased military presence, the arrival of missionaries, the evidence of skirmishes, all pointed toward the government's determination to confine all Apache bands to reservation land. "They build forts to surround our hunting grounds," Nantan summarized. "They send both bullets and Bibles to conquer us. We should strike now, while we still have strength." Kichi argued, his voice passionate. "Kill their soldiers, burn their fort, and bring 10 times more soldiers?" An elder countered. "Our people would be slaughtered." "Perhaps there is another way," Takiom suggested quietly, all eyes turning toward him. "The white child knows their ways. She could help us understand their plans." Nantan considered this. "Can she enter their fort without suspicion?" "Not alone," Takiom replied. "But if we watch and listen carefully, we might find opportunity." From her place at the edge of the council circle, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her small shoulders. She was now truly caught between worlds, no longer simply Takiom's student, but potentially a bridge between peoples teetering on the edge of devastating conflict. The council debated long into the night. Takiom's suggestion to use Sarah as a conduit for communication with the white authorities sparked fierce disagreement among the tribal leaders. "She is but a child," one elder objected. "What weight will her words carry with army commanders?" "The white soldiers search for a lost girl," Takiom countered. "If she appears healthy, unharmed, they will listen." Kichi leapt to his feet. "This is madness. You would trust our people's fate to a white child? She will betray us the moment she sees her own kind." Sarah, listening from the edge of the circle, felt a surge of indignation. After all these months, after all she had learned, did they still see her only as white? But before she could speak, an unexpected voice rose in her defense. "The child has eaten our food, learned our ways," said Lilyui, the elderly medicine woman. "I have watched her. Her spirit walks a path between worlds now." The old woman fixed Kichi with a stern gaze. "You see only with young eyes, too quick to judge, too eager for war." Nantan raised his hand for silence. "We will consider Thunder Walker's proposal. But first we must learn more about these missionaries. They may offer a path that does not require battle." The next morning, Takiom took Sarah aside, away from curious ears. "Today we go to stream near fort," he explained. "Watch missionaries. Maybe find way to speak with woman who wears locket." They left the camp before dawn, traveling swiftly through terrain now familiar to both. By mid-morning, they were concealed in a stand of cottonwoods overlooking a small stream where fort residents occasionally came to wash clothes or enjoy a brief respite from military routine. Their patience was rewarded when the missionary couple appeared shortly after noon, carrying a basket and blanket, clearly planning a simple picnic by the water. From their hiding place, Sarah studied the woman more carefully. She appeared to be in her 30s, with kind features and movements that suggested gentleness. Around her neck hung the silver locket that had caught Sarah's attention earlier. "We should speak to them," Sarah whispered. "They won't call the soldiers immediately. Missionaries usually want to help Indians, not fight them." Takiom considered this. Dangerous, but necessary. He turned to Sarah with unusual intensity. "If trap, run. Do not wait for me." Sarah nodded, though they both knew she would never abandon him. They approached openly, Takiom with empty hands held visible to show he carried no weapons, Sarah slightly behind him. The missionaries spotted them immediately, the woman gasping in surprise, the man stepping protectively in front of her. "We mean no harm," Sarah called out in English before the man could shout for help. "Please, we just want to talk." The missionaries froze at the sound of perfect English coming from this sun-browned child in Apache clothing. The woman peered around her husband, eyes widening. "Child, who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "My name is Sarah Harrison. This is Takiom. He saved my life when my family was killed by Comanche raiders." The woman's hand flew to her mouth. "Harrison? From the Ohio wagon train? But that was months ago. Everyone was reported killed." "I survived," Sarah said simply. "Takiom found me trying to hunt a bison. He could have killed me, but instead he taught me to survive." The missionaries exchanged glances of astonishment. The man still looked wary, but the woman stepped forward, her expression softening. "I'm Rebecca Miller. This is my husband, John. We're missionaries assigned to Fort Dawson." She touched the locket at her throat. "This locket? You were looking at it yesterday, weren't you? I felt someone watching." Sarah nodded. "My mother had one just like it, with roses engraved on the front." Rebecca opened the locket, revealing a tiny portrait inside. "This was a gift from my sister, Elizabeth." Sarah gasped. Elizabeth was my mother's name. A moment of stunned silence followed as connections formed. "Your mother was Elizabeth Collins before she married?" Rebecca asked, her voice hushed. "Yes," Sarah whispered, memories flooding back. "She grew up in Pennsylvania." "Then we are family," Rebecca said, tears forming in her eyes. "Elizabeth was my cousin. We grew up together like sisters." This unexpected connection transformed the encounter. John Miller relaxed his guard, and soon they were seated together by the stream, sharing the simple picnic as Sarah explained all that had happened since the raid. How Takiom had saved her, taught her, protected her. "And now his people face being forced onto reservations," she concluded. "There must be a way for peace without taking their lands and freedom." Rebecca listened intently, occasionally translating for her husband, who lacked her quick comprehension. When Sarah finished, Rebecca reached into her basket and withdrew a small leather-bound book. "I've been learning the Apache language, just beginning really," she explained, showing them the journal. On one page she had written English words. Opposite were her attempts at Apache equivalents. "I believe God wants us to understand each other, not just impose our ways." Takiom, who had remained largely silent, studied the journal with interest. "Why soldiers build big fort if want peace?" he asked in his limited English. John Miller sighed. "The army and the missionaries don't always share the same goals, I'm afraid. Colonel Harrison commands the fort." "Harrison?" Sarah interrupted. "Any relation to James Harrison from Ohio?" "I don't believe so," Rebecca replied. "But the colonel is a reasonable man, even if his orders from Washington are not always reasonable. He might listen if approached properly." "The Apache Council must decide," Takiom said. "But talking better than fighting, if words are true." As they prepared to leave, Rebecca pressed the journal into Sarah's hands. "Take this. Continue what I've started. A bridge between languages, between peoples." The gift represented more than paper and ink. It was recognition of Sarah's unique position, straddling two worlds that desperately needed to understand each other. A week of careful negotiations, conducted through Rebecca Miller as intermediary, led to an unprecedented agreement. A peace council between Apache leaders and army officers. The location chosen was neutral ground, a meadow halfway between the fort and the Apache camp, with both sides limited to 5 representatives and minimal weapons. On the morning of the council, tension gripped the Apache camp. Warriors painted their faces with ceremonial designs, while elders performed rituals to seek spiritual guidance. Sarah helped Takiom prepare, her hands steady as she applied the sacred ochre to his face, the marks of a peace chief rather than a war leader. "Are you afraid?" she asked, completing the final symbol across his forehead. "Yes," Takiom answered honestly. "Words can be more dangerous than arrows. One wrong meaning." He left the thought unfinished. Sarah understood. Her role today was crucial, to translate not just words but intentions, to bridge cultures that viewed the world in fundamentally different ways. She had spent days practicing with Rebecca's journal, ensuring she could convey complex concepts accurately in both languages. Nantan approached as they finished preparations. The chief carried a long pipe adorned with eagle feathers and intricate beadwork, the sacred peace pipe used in the most solemn tribal ceremonies. "The pipe speaks when words fail," he told Sarah. His usual stern expression softened slightly. "Remember this today, Indizi." It was the first time Nantan had referred to her by the Apache term for one adopted in spirit. A subtle but significant acknowledgement of her place among them. The Apache delegation departed mid-morning. Nantan, Takiom, two respected elders, and Sarah. Kichi had argued vehemently to be included, but Nantan had refused, recognizing the young warrior's volatile temperament might endanger the delicate negotiations. They arrived at the meadow to find the army representatives already waiting: Colonel Harrison, the fort's commander, his second-in-command, an army interpreter who spoke rudimentary Apache, and the Millers included at the colonel's insistence for their knowledge of Indian customs. The initial moments were tense, both sides eyeing each other warily across the space between them. Sarah, dressed in a blend of Apache and settler clothing Rebecca had provided, stepped into this charged silence. "Chief Nantan of the Chiricahua Apache welcomes Colonel Harrison and offers peace between our peoples," she translated, her clear voice carrying across the meadow. The colonel's eyebrows rose slightly at hearing perfect English from this child in braids and deerskin. "Tell the chief I return his welcome and hope for productive discussions," he replied formally. As Sarah translated, she noted the army interpreter's expression, a mixture of surprise and something like resentment at being upstaged by a young girl. She would need to be careful. Any perceived discrepancy between her translations and his could create dangerous misunderstandings. The council began with ceremonial exchanges. Nantan presented the peace pipe, explaining through Sarah its sacred significance. When the colonel accepted it with appropriate respect, the first barrier lowered slightly. Colonel Harrison spoke of the government's position, that all Apache bands must relocate to designated reservation lands. "The settlement of the West cannot be stopped," he stated bluntly. "The president himself has declared it the nation's destiny to expand from ocean to ocean." Sarah translated faithfully, though the concept of owning land remained alien to Apache thinking. Nantan listened impassively, then responded. "The earth is our mother," he said. "Would you sell your mother? Cut her into pieces? The land was here before any man, white or Apache. It will be here after we are gone. We do not own it. We belong to it." As the discussion continued, the fundamental divide became clear. The army offered what they considered generous terms: a reservation with government supplies, protection from settler encroachment, schools for Apache children. The Apache saw only a prison, a surrender of their way of life. Takiom, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "My people have lived free for countless generations. We follow the seasons, the game, the ancient ways. To be confined to one small piece of land is slow death for Apache spirit." Colonel Harrison sighed. "I understand your concerns, but my orders are clear. The reservation policy comes from Washington. I can negotiate terms, but not the basic requirement." An unexpected interruption came when a rider approached at speed from the direction of the fort. Both sides tensed, hands moving toward weapons. The messenger spoke urgently to Colonel Harrison, whose expression darkened. "We have unexpected visitors," he announced. "A Comanche delegation has arrived at the fort, asking to join these talks." A ripple of surprise passed through the Apache leaders. The Comanche were traditional enemies, competitors for hunting grounds and frequently at war with Apache bands. "Why would Comanche come now?" Nantan asked suspiciously. "They claim to want peace as well," Colonel Harrison replied. "They've heard of this council and wish to be included in any agreement." Takiom and Nantan exchanged concerned glances. "This changes everything," Takiom said in Apache. "Comanches speak with forked tongue. They raid our camps, then make peace with blue coats." Sarah translated their concerns to Colonel Harrison, who nodded in understanding. "I can keep them away from these talks if you prefer, but eventually, any lasting peace must include all tribes in the region." "We will consider," Nantan decided after consulting quietly with his advisors. "For today, we continue without Comanche presence." As the council resumed, Sarah found herself not just translating words but navigating a complex dance of cultural assumptions, historical grievances, and competing interests. When linguistic equivalence failed, she improvised, drawing on her unique experience in both worlds to build understanding. By late afternoon, they had reached a tentative framework, not a final agreement, but a starting point for further negotiations. The Apache would send representatives to examine the proposed reservation lands. The Army would temporarily halt any forced relocations. And perhaps most significantly, a larger peace council would be convened, including higher authorities from both sides. The tentative peace held for 3 days. Sarah divided her time between the Apache camp and Fort Dawson, where Rebecca Miller had arranged guest quarters for her. This unprecedented arrangement, a child moving freely between worlds, symbolized the fragile bridge being constructed between longtime enemies. On the 4th morning, Sarah was teaching Rebecca more Apache phrases when urgent commotion erupted in the fort. Soldiers rushed to assemble as an officer shouted orders. Through the window, they saw a patrol returning, carrying wounded men on makeshift stretchers. "Something's happened," Rebecca said, her face paling. "We should find John." They hurried outside to discover John Miller already with Colonel Harrison, both men's expressions grim as they examined items laid out on a blanket. Arrows, a knife, and a blood-stained piece of buckskin painted with Apache symbols. "What's going on?" Rebecca asked her husband. Colonel Harrison answered, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Patrol ambushed 15 miles north. 3 men dead, 4 wounded. Apache attack." He pointed to the items. "They left these deliberately. Wanted us to know who did it." Sarah stared at the evidence, her heart sinking. "May I look closer?" The colonel hesitated, then nodded curtly. Sarah carefully examined the arrows and knife, noting details a casual observer might miss. "These aren't right," she said finally. "The fletching on these arrows, it's not how Takiom's people make them. And this symbol," she pointed to the painted buckskin, "it's similar to Apache markings, but the lines are wrong. Someone wanting it to look Apache might paint this, but no real Apache would." Colonel Harrison studied her with narrowed eyes. "You're suggesting this was staged to look like an Apache attack?" "I'm saying it doesn't match what I've learned from Takiom's band," Sarah replied carefully. "I can't speak for all Apache." The colonel rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "The attack site is arranged oddly too. Bodies positioned, not fallen. Where they were struck." He turned to his adjutant. "Double the guards. No one takes action against the Apache until I investigate further." Sarah returned to the Apache camp with an army escort, finding it already buzzing with news of the attack. Takiom met her at the perimeter, his expression revealing he'd heard the accusations. "The blue coats blame us," he stated flatly. "Colonel Harrison has questions," Sarah replied. "The evidence seems wrong." Nantan called an emergency council meeting where Sarah reported everything she had observed. The tribal leaders listened intently, their concern growing. "Who benefits from breaking peace?" Nantan asked the circle. "Settlers who want Apache land," one elder suggested. "Other tribes who fear we gain advantage," offered another. "Or those among us who hunger for war," Takiom said, his gaze settling on the empty space where Kichi normally sat. "Where is Kichi today?" A troubling silence followed. No one had seen the young warrior since the previous evening. As darkness fell, Takiom and Sarah slipped away from camp, moving silently through the night toward a location Takayom refused to identify in advance. After an hour's cautious travel, they approached a small canyon where firelight flickered against stone walls. "Stay hidden," Takayom whispered. "Watch only." From their concealed position, they observed a gathering that confirmed their worst fears. Kichi, along with several young Apache warriors, meeting with a group of rough-looking white men. Even more shocking, several Comanche warriors completed the circle. "Impossible alliance," Takayom breathed. "Ancient enemies working together." They couldn't hear the conversation, but the body language told enough. Conspiratorial gestures, shared weapons, plotting. As they watched, one of the white men unfolded a map, pointing to locations while others nodded in agreement. "We've seen enough," Takayom decided. "Must warn Nantan." A twig snapped behind them. Before they could react, rough hands seized them both. Kichi stepped from the shadows, his face twisted with contempt. "The great Thunder Walker, spying like a coyote," he sneered. "And his pet white cub." They were dragged into the firelight, where the conspirators fell silent at their appearance. One of the white men, bearded, with cold eyes and a cavalry sergeant's uniform, stepped forward. "Well now, what have we here? The famous Apache girl, I presume." His mocking bow held no respect. "Heard you were messing up a good war." "Sergeant Hicks," Sarah identified him, remembering the name from fort conversations. "Colonel Harrison will have you court-martialed for this." The man laughed. "Colonel Harrison won't be giving orders much longer. Not after the Apache massacre we've got planned for tomorrow. Nothing stops a peace talk faster than a few dozen dead soldiers and settlers." One of the Comanche warriors spat on the ground near Takayom. "Apache think they make special deal with white eyes. Get best land, special treatment. Not if we stop it." The pieces fell into place, a conspiracy of those who stood to lose if peace prevailed. Corrupt soldiers like Sergeant Hicks who profited from army contracts. Settlers represented by the rough white men who wanted Apache land. Comanche who feared an Apache army alliance would target them next. And Kichi, whose hunger for war and resentment of Takayom had made him a willing pawn. "You arranged the patrol attack," Sarah realized aloud, "and made it look like Apache did it." "Smart girl," Hicks nodded. "Tomorrow's will be much bigger. Enough bodies to start a proper war. No one will listen to peace talk after that." "You betray your own people," Takayom told Kichi with quiet dignity. "For what? To satisfy your hatred." "I save my people from slavery on reservations," Kichi hissed. "Better to die fighting than live on white man's scraps." Sergeant Hicks nodded to his men. "Tie them up. The Apache can watch tomorrow's fun before we kill him." "The girl," his cold eyes assessed Sarah, "might be worth keeping alive. Could fetch a good price down Mexico way." As rough hands bound them, Sarah felt something pressed into her palm. A small knife Takayom had somehow concealed. Their eyes met briefly, a silent message passing between them. Wait for the right moment. The conspirators celebrated their coming victory with whiskey and boasts, growing less vigilant as the night wore on. Sarah and Takayom sat back to back against a boulder, bound tightly with rawhide strips. Sarah worked the small knife against her bindings, careful to keep the movement imperceptible. "When free," Takayom whispered in Apache, "wait for owl call, then run east, toward rising sun." "I won't leave you," Sarah replied firmly. "Must warn others. Only you can speak to both sides." The truth of his words struck her. If the conspirators succeeded in triggering a war, thousands would die. Apache families forced from their lands, soldiers following misguided orders, settlers caught in the crossfire. All because of a few hateful men. The bindings finally gave way. Sarah kept her hands positioned as if still tied, waiting for Takayom's signal. It came an hour later, 3 soft notes like a hunting owl, followed by a commotion as Takayom suddenly lurched to his feet. Still partially bound, and charged toward the nearest guard. In the confusion, Sarah slipped into the darkness. Behind her, shouts and sounds of struggle told of Takeom's desperate diversion. Her instinct screamed to turn back, to help him, but his words echoed in her mind. Only she could warn both sides. She ran through the night, using every skill Takeom had taught her. When she heard pursuers, she waded through streams to mask her scent and direction. When exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, she remembered the stakes. Takeom's life, the future of his people, the possibility of peace. By dawn, she had reached a ridge overlooking the valley where Fort Dawson stood. In the opposite direction lay the Apache camp. A crucial decision awaited whom to warn first. The fort was closer, but would Colonel Harrison believe her without proof? The Apache would trust her word, but could they mobilize quickly enough to stop the attack? Sarah closed her eyes, centering herself as Takeom had taught her. The answer came with clarity. She needed both sides to work together. Neither alone could stop what was coming. She changed direction, heading for a spot halfway between. There, she climbed the tallest tree she could find and, using Takeom's wooden whistle, blew the alarm call he had taught her. A piercing sound that carried for miles. Again and again she blew, until her lungs burned with the effort. It was a desperate gamble, but one that paid off. Within an hour, riders approached from both directions, an Apache scouting party from one side, an army patrol from the other. Both groups spotted her in the tree and approached warily, eyeing each other with suspicion. Sarah climbed down to face them. "I need to speak with Chief Nantan and Colonel Harrison immediately," she announced. "Lives depend on it, including Takeom's." Her appearance, exhausted, clothing torn, face scratched from running through brush, lent urgency to her words. Within the hour, she was addressing both leaders in an unprecedented joint meeting at the meadow where the Peace Council had been held. Sarah spoke rapidly, describing the conspiracy, identifying the participants, explaining the planned attack intended to trigger all-out war. Colonel Harrison's face darkened with anger at the betrayal by his own men, while Nanton's expression remained impassive, though his eyes reflected deep concern. "Sergeant Hicks has 20 men, plus Kitchi's warriors and the Comanche," Sarah concluded. "They plan to attack a settler wagon train, then the fort's western approach, making both sides blame each other." "Where is Thunder Walker now?" Nantan asked, using Takeom's tribal name. Sarah's voice caught. "They're holding him at a canyon camp. He created a diversion so I could escape. They'll kill him when they discover I'm gone." Colonel Harrison studied the rough map Sarah had drawn. "I know this place. It's a smuggler's hideout. My men can approach from the south while your warriors come from the north," he suggested to Nantan. "Catch them in a pincer movement." The audacity of the proposal, army and Apache fighting as allies, hung in the air between them. "Why should I trust blue-coat soldiers?" Nantan asked bluntly. "Because we both have been deceived," the colonel replied. "And because this child has somehow managed to belong to both our worlds." Nantan considered Sarah, the white girl who had learned Apache ways, who had risked her life to prevent bloodshed between ancient enemies. He reached a decision. "We will join forces this one time," he declared, "to save Thunder Walker and stop these traitors." The joint rescue party assembled quickly, a dozen of the colonel's most trusted men and an equal number of Apache warriors. Sarah insisted on accompanying them, her knowledge of the canyon's layout proving invaluable as they planned their approach. "You'll remain with the rear guard," Colonel Harrison instructed her firmly. "You've done enough already." Sarah reluctantly agreed, though she had no intention of staying behind while Takeom's life hung in the balance. As they prepared to depart, Rebecca Miller approached with a package wrapped in cloth. "I want you to have this," she said, pressing it into Sarah's hands. Inside was a beautifully crafted medicine shield, a traditional Apache protection symbol that Rebecca had somehow acquired. It belonged to a peace chief from many years ago, Rebecca explained. John traded for it to study the symbols. I think Takiom should have it now. Sarah accepted the gift with solemn gratitude, understanding its significance. Another bridge between worlds, another symbol of the unlikely alliance forming around her. The rescue party set out at dusk, moving silently through the gathering darkness. Sarah rode with a young army private, instructed to keep her safely away from the fighting. But as they neared the canyon, she already knew what she must do. No one else could move between both groups, ensuring the fragile alliance held when bullets started flying. She touched the medicine shield secured to her saddle, drawing strength from its presence. Takiom had taught her to survive in a harsh world. Now she would use those lessons to save him. Dawn approached as the rescue party reached the canyon's edge. Below, the conspirators' camp stirred with early activity. Men preparing weapons, checking ammunition, going over plans for the day's deadly deception. Sarah, having slipped away from her assigned protector, crouched between Colonel Harrison and Nantan as they surveyed the scene. There, she whispered, pointing to a figure tied to a post near the central fire. That's Takiom. Even from a distance, the Apache warrior's condition was alarming. His head hung forward, his body slumped against the restraints. But the slight movement of his chest confirmed he still lived. Sergeant Hicks has most of his men positioned here and here, Colonel Harrison noted, indicating the canyon's southern approaches. The Comanche appear to be camped separately, over by that western ridge. Kitchi and his followers guard the northern exit, Nantan added, his keen eyes picking out details others missed. The colonel outlined their strategy. His soldiers would create a diversion from the south while Apache warriors slipped in from the east to free Takiom. The plan was sound, but Sarah saw a critical flaw. They'll kill Takiom at the first sign of attack, she said. Someone needs to reach him before the fighting starts. Too dangerous, Colonel Harrison objected immediately. I can do it, Sarah insisted. No one pays attention to a child. I'll pretend I'm trying to escape again. Draw their focus while your men get into position. Both leaders began to protest, but Sarah continued with determination. Takiom risked everything to save me when he could have left me to die. I won't hide while he needs me. Nantan studied her with new respect. She has the heart of a warrior, he told the colonel. And she speaks truth. The enemy will not expect her to return. Reluctantly, Colonel Harrison agreed to modify the plan. Sarah would approach the camp alone, creating a distraction that would allow the rescue forces to move closer undetected. The actual attack would begin only when she had reached Takiom. The medicine shield from Rebecca, strapped to Sarah's back, felt like a physical manifestation of protection as she made her way down the rocky slope. Her heart hammered in her chest, but her steps remained steady. Takiom had taught her well, how to move quietly, how to project confidence despite fear, how to observe and adapt to changing situations. A sentry spotted her when she was 50 yards from the camp. "The girl's back," he shouted, alerting the others. Sergeant Hicks emerged from a tent, his face registering surprise then cruel satisfaction. "Couldn't stay away, could you? Worried about your savage friend." Sarah forced herself to appear frightened and exhausted, not difficult given the circumstances. "Please," she begged, stumbling forward. "Don't hurt him anymore. I'll do whatever you want." The performance drew the attention of the entire camp, just as she'd hoped. Even Kitchi approached, his expression a mixture of contempt and curiosity. "Brave girl," Hicks mocked, grabbing her arm roughly. "Or just stupid. Either way, you're too late to stop what's coming." Sarah allowed herself to be dragged toward where Takiom was bound. As they approached, Takiom raised his head slightly, enough for Sarah to see the extent of his injuries. They had beaten him severely, one eye swollen shut, dried blood caking his face. But in his open eye, she saw recognition, then alarm at her presence. "Say goodbye to your Apache protector," Hicks sneered, forcing her to kneel before Takiom. After today's massacre, we'll hang him as the ringleader. Sarah met Takiyomi's gaze steadily. In Apache, she whispered, "Friends come. Be ready." The signal came moments later, 3 short owl calls, followed by 2 longer ones. Instantly, Sarah dropped flat to the ground as the world erupted in chaos. Gunfire crackled from the southern ridge as Colonel Harrison's men opened fire. Simultaneously, Apache war cries rang out as Nanton's warriors descended from the east. In the confusion, Sarah scrambled to Takiyomi, using the small knife she'd concealed to cut his bonds. "Can you move?" she asked urgently. "Enough," he grunted, pulling himself upright with visible effort. The battle swirled around them as they staggered toward cover. The conspirators, caught completely by surprise by the coordinated attack, fought back desperately. Sergeant Hicks bellowed orders, trying to rally his men, while Kitchi and his followers found themselves trapped between 2 forces. Through the smoke and confusion, Sarah spotted a horse, one of the conspirators' mounts, tethered nearby. "There," she pointed. "If we can reach it." They made their way forward, Takiyomi leaning heavily on Sarah's shoulder. They had almost reached the horse when Kitchi appeared before them, knife drawn, fury contorting his features. "Traitors," he spat. "You destroy our people with your peace talks." He lunged at Takiyomi, who was too weak to fully defend himself. Without hesitation, Sarah stepped between them, the medicine shield raised to protect them both. Kitchi's knife struck the shield, the impact sending shockwaves through Sarah's arms but leaving the reinforced hide unbroken. The moment's delay was enough. An Apache arrow found Kitchi's shoulder, driving him backward. Before he could recover, Colonel Harrison himself appeared, pistol trained on the young warrior. "It's over, son," the colonel said firmly. "Put down your weapon." By midday, the battle had ended. The conspiracy had been crushed, with most participants either dead or captured. Sergeant Hicks died trying to escape, shot by one of his own men seeking leniency. The Comanche fled early in the fighting, abandoning their temporary allies. In the aftermath, something remarkable occurred. Apache warriors and army soldiers worked side by side, tending the wounded of both groups, sharing water and supplies. Colonel Harrison and Nantan stood together over a map, discussing not war but boundaries that might allow coexistence. Takiyomi, his wounds treated by both an army doctor and an Apache healer, sat with Sarah at the edge of the activity. "You returned for me," he said quietly. "Why?" "You're my family now," Sarah replied simply. "The only one I have left." "Not only," Takiyomi corrected, gesturing toward Rebecca Miller, who was helping distribute food to the wounded. "Your mother's blood lives in her." "True," Sarah acknowledged, "but you taught me how to live when all seemed lost. That makes you family in a different way." Takiyomi nodded slowly, understanding. "2 families, 2 worlds. Like you." In the years that followed, that connection between worlds became Sarah's life work. The peace established that day proved lasting, though not without challenges. Takiyomi, recognized for his wisdom, became a respected negotiator between his people and the government. Rather than being forced onto distant reservations, the Apache secured protected territories close to their traditional lands. Sarah grew into a remarkable young woman, fluent in multiple languages and cultures, dedicated to building understanding between peoples who had once seen each other only as enemies. The school founded by Rebecca Miller became a place where both settler and Apache children learned together, with Sarah often teaching alongside her cousin. Decades later, an elderly Sarah sat beneath a cottonwood tree in the valley that had once been Takiyomi's hidden sanctuary, now the central gathering place for a community neither fully Apache nor fully white, but something new and hopeful. Children of mixed heritage played nearby as she finished telling her story to the newest generation. And that is how a hungry girl with a sharpened stick and a lone warrior who chose compassion over vengeance changed the course of our history, she concluded, touching the worn medicine shield that still hung in her lodge. by remembering that the bravest thing is not to fight, but to see beyond the boundaries others create. A small boy looked up at her with curious eyes. "Is that really how it happened, grandmother?" Sarah smiled, the years falling away as she remembered the wild, desperate child she had once been, and the stern, wounded man who had saved her. "The important parts," she assured him. "The parts worth remembering."